Thank you. This is going to be a fun class. Again, we're enjoying seeing our history. And Lord, help us to connect again, as we've been talked about, just to see the strengths and weaknesses of the church throughout its time. And again, help us to, at the same time, just evaluate where are we? Are we doing, again, loved AJ's sermon, Lord, thank you for it. Are we doing these same stupid things ourselves? And Lord, just, cleanse us of our stupidity and our traditionalisms. Help us to hold on to the pure relationship that you've given us through your Son. In his name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so we're looking at 590 through 1054. This is the beginning of the Middle Ages, and it's often called the Dark Ages because, again, by and large, this is that period of time where you kind of think about these are people. And I wanted to put about 6 slides in here based on the Holy Grail. But this is the picture of those. There's some lovely filth over here, Dennis, and they're just subsistence people, right? This is the dark ages of it, right? Shelley writes, "It is the Christian church that put together a new order called Europe. The church took the lead in the rule of law, the pursuit of knowledge, and the expressions of culture." And so hopefully what we're going to see is the Middle Ages at the beginning weren't as dark as we tend to think of them. Now, throwing in some tidbits of stuff in here. We often hear the word basilica describing a church, right? That term basilica. In ancient Rome, basilicas were basically just any building that was set aside for legal matters or places of business to be transacted. Okay? And so in this period of time, these buildings were repurposed into Christian churches. Okay, and so that's where we get the term basilica from. In fact, parts of the basilica, the apse, the aisle, the nave, these are all still words that we use to describe the functions and bits and pieces of modern churches and whatnot. Now again, one of the reasons I like the chant video up there is because it was in a Romanesque church. So if you ever go to Europe and you want to say, is this a Romanesque church? You can look for these obvious distinguishing characteristics. Everything is semicircular. The Romans always built in semicircles. So all their bridges, all their buildings, this whole hemisphere of the Pantheon is perfectly spherical. So if you were to take the top half of it and invert it, it would literally touch the floor directly underneath the oculus. So they built a hemispherical system to it, right? And so again, all the niches, everything, all semicircles and things like that. We're going to begin by introducing 3 people who I hope will kind of be the threads or the cords that run through this whole thing. This guy's name is Saint Denis. And if you go to the front of Notre Dame in Paris, on the left side of the main door is a statue of a man holding his what? Head. His own head, exactly right. He is as Satchel set this up last week, he is the most famous Christian célophore. This means somebody who carries your own head. It's literally a word, right? He is still the patron saint of France, which you'll see why as we go through this whole thing, right? They did. Huh? He's the patron saint of France. France. Yeah, France is going to be a big part of this whole thing, right? Now, of course, you can see what? You've got the little Shekinah glory over there. In the back of the carving, they put his little crown back where his head would be and stuff like this, right? So again, what happened to him is in the 270s, it's still under this intense persecution, and a guy named Cinicianus basically ordered Denis to be beheaded. And as opposed to taking him up to the Temple of Mars, the soldiers more or less just decapitate him at the bottom of the hill. The hill is now known as Mount Marta, right? It's the mountain of martyrs, okay? But it's not much of a mount, it's just a hill, right? Now, he picks up his head, walks up to the hill, cleans it up so it's not bloody, and then for 4 miles preaches a sermon of love and forgiveness. Of course. Gets to the home of one of his parishioners, basically hands her his head, and dies. At which point she does the most obvious thing, which is what?
Screams.
Buries him.
I don't know if that's most obvious. I don't know if it's actually ever happened.
I don't know what I'd be like. I'm disposing of him too, personally. That's my. It's the same. But then she builds a chapel over him, right? And so the chapel is now known as Saint Denis. Now, again, Saint Denis is, and again, might say it's Saint Denis, but it's Denis. That's because he wasn't French when he died. Okay, so just want to point that out. Okay, he's proto-French, right? Anyway, sorry. Anyway, moving on.
Good luck with this.
Good luck with this whole thing. This is a famous suburb in Paris. Now, so that's one of our guys. This is the second one. Now, again, I'm winning a $5 bet that I couldn't bring the word Clovis into a lesson for my wife, Renee, who lived in Clovis all her life. So Clovis is an important person. If you hear the term Gaul, Gaul is kind of if you look at a European map, it's kind of everything that's west and north of what you kind of tend to think of Rome or the Roman Empire, right? It's a mixture of these Roman and Germanic tribes over the years. And when Rome fell, all this stuff kind of becomes unincorporated in a long way. This guy, Clovis, is a Salian Frank who belongs supposedly to a family called that descends from a guy named Merovich. Merovich is a legendary, mythical kind of a figure, but he was probably based on something real. And so they become known as the Merovingians. And he goes off and starts doing some battles, and he wins, starts beating back some of the other Frankish tribes, and so he starts to bring together something that we would now call the Merovingian dynasty. Okay, and so these lines of kings are going to have tremendous influence on Europe, and it all begins with this guy Clovis. Now, the picture over here is of his baptism. He is the first of the really truly barbarian type of princes or kings to convert to Christianity. His wife's name is Cotilda, and she had been evangelizing for him for a while, but it isn't until he is in a sticky wicket and is in a bad sort of way that he finally basically cries out, and he does so in Old English, Jesus Christ, Cotilda says that thou art the Son of the living God, and thou canst give victory to those who hope in thee. Give me victory, and I will be baptized. I have tried my gods, and they have deserted me. I call on thee, only save me. Who does that sound like? Predecessor. Constantine, exactly right. And shockingly, his enemies were defeated. So, of course, he comes home, he tells his wife, and what does she do? Let's get the Bishop of Reims over here, and we're going to baptize you. Now, what's interesting is that he is not the only one who's baptized. 3,000 of his soldiers, because they're right there too in the sticky wicket, also convert to Christianity. Now, this is the important part of this, right? What type of Christianity was known in the German areas at this time? We talked about this. Arianism. Why would Arianism be so popular in Germany at this time?
Because Arius was shipped north when he got kicked out.
That's right. He moves in that direction. But why does his message resonate with these people?
It resonates with paganism for like Jesus is like a Herculean type character.
That's right, because in their mind, it's Odin and then Thor is their most important one. Thor is what? Odin's firstborn.
Can you remind me, we've had a lot of the different isms. Could you remind me one more time what?
I got the dude right here. What's Arianism?
You saw that Jesus was not a fully God. There was a time when he was not, and then he was created.
Yep.
Okay.
And so from their perspective, from these German tribes who value the firstborn, right, especially in their actually fairly well, Norse mythology is actually fairly well developed, they could sit there and see Jesus and Thor as being very similar. So Arianism resonates with these people because it's what? It's something that they can connect with their other deal. When Clovis is baptized, he is Nicene, which means he is now tied to who? Back to the papacy, back to Rome. This is very, very important. Now, we talked about this today in church. There are two types of monastic people, Cenobitic, who are communal, like we saw with the monastery today, and Eremitic, which is the hermits, the isolated individual bits and pieces of these people, right? Now, the Hermetic people, monastic people, were obviously much more successful at the beginning. You know, you think about Jerome and some of these other people who were just by themselves, hermits, because why? They were literally well isolated. And so when the persecutions came through, you don't walk 5 miles out into a desert to try and find one guy to kill him. You know what I'm saying? So when Renee and I were in Turkey, we're out in, what was the name of the place? Cappadocia, right? And there's all of these little holes in the ground that are built out there, and these types of individual hermits and things are living out there. But this guy here, Benedict of Nursia, really puts the Cenobitic monastery together. Now, again, it's essentially, yes, we still want to be separate from the world, but we can do it in a communal way, because then we can be self-sufficient in ways that we weren't before.
Well,
So, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I
Absolutely.
was thinking it's very similar today, right? Like, you can be as religious as you want as long as you're quiet about it. Which as long as you're not spreading what you're thinking, you want to stay in a monastery, be my guest. We're going to leave you alone.
The world's probably much happier with you, right? Exactly right. Now, what Benedict brings to the table that the previous ones had not brought to the table is that book he is holding is not the Bible. That is the rule of Benedict. Okay, and this is super important. It's a rule. It's a rule of how to order and run your monastery, how to work and pray together, and that really becomes the whole focus of his shtick. He's like, look, these are everything about the rule kind of comes down to these two things: how you should pray, how you should work, and achieving this separation through community this way. Now, again, these Benedictine communities are going to be a massive influence on this period of time. And you'll see us here, and you'll hear us say the name Benedict over and over again. In fact, they go so far as to come up with this idea of the plan of St. Gall. It's a 9th century document, so it's in my period of time, but it is a prototype of what a Benedictine monastery would look like. So we think of franchising today as being like McDonald's, blah, blah, blah. This is the original franchise concept. Okay, and again, they never actually built any one of these to look just like it, but any Benedictine monastery from about this time forward had every single one of these elements. Exactly right. Yeah, pretty interesting. So, how are these three men connected? That's really the question, right? So where are we going? And by the way, with the exception of this guy who just basically enters into our area, these three people all predate my area. So how in the world do they come together and make things happen? Well, let's start with our dating first thing. We start with 590 for one particular reason. Gregory the Great. He's not called Gregory the Great. In fact, if you guys read the book, Shelley does a good job of introducing Gregory and how he's kind of brought into the situation. Gregory would never describe himself as great, but he defines the Catholic Church basically till today. And then the 1054 will be the Great Schism. So those are our two endpoints. And what we're going to see is this beginning of the growth of what will become the Holy Roman Empire that ultimately results in the schism between East and West. The Byzantines now become something completely separate. So moving on, Gregory the Great over here, sitting there minding his own business in his little hat, is basically, again, was not first and foremost even a cleric. If you all remember reading about it, he was appointed to his position by who? Does anybody remember? No, well, Justin II. So he's appointed to a kind of a secular position as an administrator of Rome, and then spends time in now you got me saying Constantinople, right? Yeah, exactly. I got that playing in my head now. So that's the earworm. Istanbul is Constantinople. So he's over there for 7 odd years, and then is sent back because the various people who are running, the Pope, this kind of, call it the city manager, are dead, and he's appointed to these positions. Well, the problem with this is that Justin, who is running the Byzantine Empire, is not doing a good job of kind of keeping the area around Italy free of stuff. The Avars, the Lombards, etc., all sit between there. And the Lombards in particular, again, a Germanic group, have come down into Italy and are causing problems. Classic German people, right? It's all about the brat and the beer, right? And they're just, and obviously, you know,
can't leave Italy alone.
No, because the Italians are all about. Yeah, that's right. They were, but the Italians are all about wine and cheese, and so there was obviously going to be conflicts. So in this case, let me do it like this. Bring this up, please. There we go. So you've got this kind of mash of stuff in here. The purple kind of represents the imperial territory, the Byzantines. The green represents these Lombards. And again, when I say Lombards, do not think monolithic in any way, shape, or form. They are This is a group of people called the Lombards, but these people down here in Campania would probably not be very happy to hang out with the people from Tuscany, for instance. Okay, so they're not unified in any way, shape, or form. But what Gregory does is, as Rome is constantly surrounded and being threatened by this, he's able actually to go off and generate some alliances, some treaties, some space between himself and the Lombards. And so what's interesting is that this guy ends up with a lot more influence with the Lombards than obviously the rest of the Byzantine Empire. Okay? Now, from that point forward, what Rome discovers is that they can have political influence, not just religious influence, if that makes sense, right? Because now Gregory is known for not his command of the scriptures or his ecclesiastical knowledge. It is his political ability to pull something together that he's famous for. Now, he's Gregory the Great for a number of different reasons, but the biggest reason is this. He puts together basically the basis or the bones of the modern Catholic Church. Gregorian chants, which we heard here at the beginning, right? He is big on missionary work. Administrative reforms. So again, taking these lands that he is now kind of secure to help the poor people in that period of time. He was a Benedictine monk. So not shockingly, he does what? Reinvests into that monastic tradition. He writes the biography of St. Benedict for us. He's one of the 4 Latin doctors of the church, and he formulates the 7 capital sins. So if you wonder where that came from, you can blame him. And then, of course, he takes on some of these other titles and things like this. Now, what's fascinating, too, about him is he does a lot more than just that. He elevates the practice. When we talk about Catholicism and they take communion, what do they think the Eucharist represents? Is anybody ex-Catholic? Yeah, they think it represents the actual body and blood, which is why they never let laity conduct the service, right? Because you have to be a priest in order to do this, right? Who came up with that belief? Gregory, right? We talk about people who need to be, that you go to purgatory. How do you get out of purgatory? Money, but not just, but that comes a little bit later. With what? Prayer and other things like this, right? Who comes up with that idea? Gregory, right? Well, he read through Augustine and stuff like this, right? But he is the one who kind of sits there and says, so this is something fringe, and he's doing what? He's making it mainstream. Okay, exactly right.
Well, and in that specific case, then there's a mystical element to it of like a guy dying, and then they pray for 30 days, and then a different guy at a different monastery is like, "Oh, he's out now." He's out now. Didn't you hear? Yeah. He's out, right?
Did you not get the vision? Did you not get the vision, right? And of course, what are some of the other ways that you connect to these things? Relics of saints, right? And so the bones of saints and important people, etc., etc. So these are just some of the things that Gregory's known for. So obviously, Gregory the Great, right? Now, let's bring this up. Oop. All right, so we're going to leave the impact of the ecclesiastical church, and we're going to go off and take a look at these Merovingians, right? Started with Clovis the First. So I want you to take a look at the names. This was not created by AI. This is actually a real chart, a real thing, right? Some of the names: Bavaria. What do we call this part of Germany today? Salzburg, Munich, etc. Bavaria, right? Where did they get that name? This period of time. Provence, Burgundy, Aquitaine, right? So Saxony. So many of these places that we know are their names, naming conventions and structures come out of this period of time of the Merovingian dynasty, right? And so the things that we tend to think of happened right here and stuff like this, right? So they're all formulated with that. Now, what's sort of sad about this is that, and again, so when Clovis here at the very top dies, he has 4 sons across the line there. And so who gets the kingdom? The oldest. That's what we would say, right? Primogeniture, right? We're used to that. We see that in the Bible. You know, the oldest son gets all the rewards, blah, blah, blah. That's not how they ran. For all of you not firstborn kids, you would have loved this period of time because you got 1/4 or 1/5 or 1/12. However many brothers you had, you got your share. Doesn't that sound like a great idea? If you're the 2nd, 3rd, 5th born,
Not if you want unity in the kingdom.
Not if you want what?
You want to stay alive.
Yeah, if you want to live a long time.
Well, that was always a problem, regardless of how you ran your government. You were always in danger of being killed.
You were always in danger of being killed, but you're in danger of being killed by who now? I mean, your siblings, right?
Always were.
Always were, but now it's even worse, right? Because again, and then what happens if one of them just dies? Now what do? Do you throw it all back in the pot, divide it by what the remainder and some of this, right? So shockingly, this generates what? A whole bunch of weakness in the system. Again, remember when we talk about in the Spanish Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, the same thing is running through the Visigoths. So they have the same process in the Visigoths, which will come back to bite them in the butt as well, right? Now, interesting enough, when Clovis gets baptized, as he's going through this whole thing, but Clovis's baptism does what? Brings this whole line into the orbit of the Catholic Church, okay? And so it starts to pull together the Frankish kingdoms and the Catholic Church and sends them on a course off together from that point forward. Clovis dies in 511, if you can read the little tiny thing up at the top. He's buried in a Parisian church called St. Genevieve, right? Now, what's interesting is when you get to this last guy here, Dagobert, which I think is, one more please. There's Dagobert. Which by the way, is not a what was the guy's name? Who just died recently? Who did the Dilbert? Scott Adams had a character named Dagobert one time. I'm assuming that's where he got it. Well, Dogbert, he had a manager named Dagobert at the very, very beginning. Yeah.
Pointy hair?
No? Somebody else, yeah. There's just I read the first 3 of his books. He had just really interesting characters. So
Calvin and Hobbes are named after John Calvin and Thomas Hobbes.
Right, exactly. So some of these people showing their literary bones, and some of this anyway. So Clovis goes off and dies. Dagobert is really the last of the really structurally strong people in this period of time, right? He goes off and with his other buddies around here, he actually provides some of the intellectual capacity that they need. He's one of these people who changes the currency from gold to silver. It will go back to gold, but this is one of his moves there. He establishes the laws in the kingdoms. He writes the laws for these other brothers, cousins, etc. that he works on. He's really the last of these efficient people during this period of time. Now, what's interesting is in 1632, Dagobert establishes an abbey at Saint Denis. Saint Denis at this time, Denis is only what? It's a destination. It's where because again, you go there because why? This is where this dude's bones are buried, right? So Dagobert basically goes off and says he upgrades it, and he basically makes it into a Benedictine monastery. And then he upgrades the building in a grand Romanesque basilica. And so in 632, this new basilica opens up. Now, this is a heavily endowed monastery. It gets land, treasures, privileges, making it one of the most important in France. Now, what's interesting is Dagobert himself then goes off and says, now when I die, Clovis died and he's buried in Paris. Where does Dagobert decide he's going to be buried? Saint Denis, right? From that point forward, all the Merovingian kings, all of the Carolingian kings, and all the kings of France will be buried at Saint Denis all the way until the French Revolution. So that's how important Denis then becomes for us, right? So now all the rest of these kings kind of down in here are known as the feeble kings. We'll find out why. A, because of the structure, but B, because the average age of most of these people when they become king is 6 years old. Not very helpful, right? Yeah. Most 6-year-olds can't run a kingdom. So who do you put in place? What do you do in that stead? What do you do? You put a steward. And their steward they called the mayor of the palace. So we're going to bring that up here in just a bit. But one more thing we have to fling out there. Islam is founded during this period of time. 632, this is a picture of Gabriel giving the Holy Scriptures, the new revelations, off to Muhammad. Now, what's interesting about this is, and how it applies to us in a big sort of a way, is Islam spreads through all of these old areas. And what you'll see with this chart, we'll talk about Europe over here. The Iberian Peninsula is in green, but the rest of this is Islam as well. What are the big things? What are the big cities that Islam obviously takes over? Alexandria, which is a huge bishopric for the Christian church. What other places? Antioch, another one, big one, up there on the top part of the Mediterranean. Antioch, another one of the 5 big bishoprics. Where's the other big place they take over? Jerusalem, right? The headquarters of Christianity, etc., right? But they are limited. You notice that they don't make their way into the Byzantine Empire because the empire is strong enough to keep them back. And they spread then across North Africa and moving in that direction. So what's interesting about this picture is that where can Christianity go? Has to go north, right? And so whether you think in terms of like the Rus, which is called what's the predecessor for Russia, Rus straight north, and then obviously everything in Europe, this is where Christianity is sort of trapped by the territories of these guys right here. One last thing, if you know anything about Islam, when Muhammad dies, he does not have any sons who are of age to sort of take over. And so Islam immediately splits into 2 different groups. And what we now know today is the Sunni and the Shia, right? What's interesting is that the group that followed a family member of Muhammad is actually the least represented. They are probably only 12 or 15% of Muslims in the world today. The rest are the people who more or less just said, hey, like the people down in Egypt in particular where they started, are like, we're going to just pick a completely different caliphate and run with this idea. They represent 85% of what's going on. Iran and Iraq, which sit next to each other, represented 2 halves of that situation butted up against each other. Iran represents that original group of small people. Interestingly enough, as they felt pressure from below and couldn't go any farther north, they all escape over to the far corner of Gibraltar, and they are the ones who will invade Spain in the 700s.
Can I add one more thing here?
Yep.
In Africa, the kingdom of Aksum on there, by this time, that kingdom of Aksum has been officially Christian as a kingdom for over 200 years.
Yep. Yeah, it's a long time. This is the thing. It's a loss, right? Yeah, big time.
They get isolated from
everything else.
Christianity.
So you guys know what he's talking about? It's hard to see. Aksum is down here. So this is they are basically now pulled apart from everything else. Okay, next question. Here we go. So one of these mayors of the palace is this guy named Charles Martel, the Hammer, right? What Martel is famous for is again, as the Muslims moved up into the Iberian Peninsula in 711, they basically showed up sailing across the Gibraltar Strait with 7,000 men, and the intent was basically to be like a Viking raid. We're going to run in, we're going to grab a bunch of stuff, and we're going to take off. When they ran in, what they found was nobody was home. Okay, the Visigoths were there, but they had no armies, no standing structures whatsoever. That whole kingdom had just split and split and split and split and split. So 7,000 men basically were able to conquer the entire Iberian Peninsula. That's how weak it was. And they just kind of work their way north and keep running through this. Now, that's all well and good until they get to what? The Pyrenees, which separates the Iberian Peninsula from mainland Europe, and that's where the border of modern-day France is basically today, right? As soon as they started coming across, the guy on the other side was like, I can't fight these people off. They have cavalry. We don't even know what to do with this, right? Sort of a deal, right? And so Charles Martel is called in, and he's like, I've got this, no problem. He has an actual army of trained individuals who know what they're doing, and they come in, and the Battle of Tours, which happens in this period of time, decisively routs the Umayyad dynasty and pushes them back over the Pyrenees. Now, they will never reconquer the Iberian Peninsula until much later than past my time. But what will ultimately happen is they create a demilitarized zone that's now known as the Spanish Marches on the other side of the Pyrenees. So from that point forward, Spain is off on its own. What's interesting about that is during that period of time from Spain in the mid 700s until the Great Crusades get started. It is a place where Christians, Muslims, and Jews basically all live together. Yes, there's conflicts. Yes, there's fighting. But by and large, there's actually quite a bit of cooperation. It's a very unique time in history when those three religions can all more or less coexist with each other. Now, during the time of the mayors of the palace, there are missionaries who are, because again, the Germans are now what? They're Arians by and large, and so you need to send missionaries into it. This guy, St. Boniface, is one of the biggest, most important missionaries to the Germanic tribes during this period of time. He, again, not surprisingly, is a Benedictine. Okay? Again, you can see how powerful Benedict has become in the church right off the bat. He's also English, which will be important for us to understand a little bit later. Now, he is still the patron saint of Germany. Okay? The picture is him doing what? Chopping down the sacred oak tree. This is the important part. These Germanic clans or tribes, again, they were not unified in any way, shape, or form, but a clan would basically build like a mead hall near a sacred oak. And that was sort of the center of their community and the center of their worship. He comes in and he sits there and says, you guys are idiots, and I will chop down the tree to prove that Thor is not going to do anything to me. And so when he does and he lives, it's a big deal. And so he literally goes around chopping trees down and converting people. I love it. I think that's great. So, Martel has a son, couple of sons. This is one called Pepin the Short. It literally is his name, Pepin the Short.
So these are the mayor of the palace's sons?
Mayor of the,
They're not
yeah.
the king's sons.
No, that's right. This is, yeah. So Charles Martel is a mayor of the palace. He has a son, two sons. This is one of them, Pepin the Short. He's the more important of the two, right? The other guy's name is Carloman. Okay?
So do they take, because he's wearing a crown, so did they take...
We're getting there.
Okay.
There are no pictures of him without a crown because he doesn't want to remember what life was like without a crown, you know. Now, he and his brother Carloman are because they're mayors of the palace, right? They're the intellectual horsepower, the call them prime ministers, whatever. So can they be educated or uneducated? They have to be educated. So where do you send your sons if you want to educate them?
Monastery.
Monastery. What monastery do you think they sent him to?
Saint Denis.
Saint Denis. Exactly right. He and his brother actually end up at one specific... Now again, the big Benedictine monasteries in Italy, Monte Cassino, if you've ever seen the World War II images of them blasting Monte Cassino, that's the original. But Saint Denis is where he and his brother end up, right? So again, just think about these connections. So now Carloman himself will ultimately retire from his, duties, and he will retire to Monte Cassino. So they remain hooked up with it from this period of time, right? Now, what's interesting is when Pepin kind of gets in charge, and he's mayor of the palace, he basically takes Boniface, who's been doing not only this missionary work, but this organizational work. Boniface has been making some improvements in how the monasteries work and connect and interact with each other. Pepin has seen some of that firsthand, so he does what? He starts to push that further out amongst these monastic and Frankish communities everywhere. Now, Pepin's loyalty or alliance to the papacy basically allows him to depose the last of the Merovingian kings. So he has this famous back and forth with one of the popes, and I think the guy's name is Pope Zachary, and he basically asks him this question: is it right for a king who has no power to remain king? Therefore, is it right for a person who has the power to not become king? And he's basically making the argument to say these Merovingians are idiots, right, and useless. And I'm doing all the work. Why can't I be king? And shockingly, Zachary goes, sure, why not? But that's the little bit of, what would you call it, credibility that he needs in order to do what? To stage a bloodless coup. And so the last of the Merovingian kings are more or less put away in monasteries, and that's the end of the Merovingians, right? And so Pepin becomes king. Now, from that perspective, what happens is that he gets crowned. Now, here's what's fun about this deal, right? This original crowning of Pepin occurs by Boniface, okay? what's interesting is in 754, Pope Stephen, a later pope after Zachary, comes all the way across and leaves Italy and crowns him. This is this picture of him being crowned in what monastery? What chapel? St. Denis again, right? So the Pope literally leaves Italy, travels to Paris, France, to do what? To crown this guy. Why does he do that? Because he needs what? Help. The Lombards are still in Italy. They're still a pain in the butt. And so by giving him legitimacy, Catholic legitimacy, he exacts a kind of a pledge from him. Take care of the Lombards for me. So not surprisingly, Pepin heads into Italy and starts beating up on Lombards.
So it's more funny. You keep saying Catholic, but at this point, it's just the Church of the West.
It's the Church of the West. Yeah, exactly. I'm using an anachronism. He's exactly right. I'm using our term for it because, again, that's what the Catholics will look back and say, we've been Catholics since this period of time. Leo, the first pope, right? But it's exactly right. This is the Church of the West. And in fact, Stephen, the Pope, actually owes his allegiance to who? The Byzantines in Constantinople, all right? But what's happening is we're seeing what? This guy is basically doing all of this work independent of the Eastern Church. He's setting up his own alliances and his own structures and his own security for Rome by working through these Frankish this new Frankish dynasty, which will now be called the Carolingians. Now, in 756, Pepin then takes all this land. So remember we had the purple and the green? He takes a lot of that green away from the Lombards, and then instead of gifting it back to the Byzantine Church, he gifts it to the Pope. And it becomes the Papal States. If you've never heard this term, the Papal States are huge blocks of Italy that the papacy will run for 1,000 years. Sets them up securely from that period of time. And again, so now the papacy is taking on again what? More and more worldly, secular duties than just the administration of people's souls. Well, Pepin has a kid. And one of his kids' name is Charlemagne. You'll notice our font has changed to Times New Roman. We'll explain that in just a second. Now again, Shelley's chapter on Charlemagne is quite good. So if you haven't read it, go off and do some of that. But I want to basically do something he did, which is to connect Pepin to Charlemagne. Pepin was quite a remorseless and determined foe. When he battled somebody, he battled other Frankish clans, he battled the Lombards. Anybody he battled, they found him to be excellent in tactics, siege craft, moving people around supply lines. He was really well organized. And so he had conquests on the southern frontiers of Francia. He basically took over Aquitaine. He set his son up, Charlemagne, in so many different ways that when Charlemagne comes into the situation, he only has to kind of continue what his father has started, if that makes sense, right? And so Charlemagne is basically in good shape. And so Shelley writes, when Charles succeeded his father in 768, his father Pepin the Short, his mind was now set on 3 goals: military power to crush his enemies, religious power to direct his people's souls, intellectual power to instruct both soul and mind. Charlemagne's success in these areas made Europe a new political order, nominally Christian, for 1,000 years. Now the picture we have here is of Pope Leo III placing the crown on Charlemagne's head, Christmas Day 799. When he put the crown on his head, he said, "To Charles, the most pious, crowned Augustus by God, to the great peacemaking emperor, long life and victory." And the Pope prostrated himself before Charles. Okay? Now, in their minds, at this moment in time, something new arrived on the scene. This was a restoration of the Christian Roman Empire. And so from this point forward, we will hear the term the Holy Roman Empire. It begins right here on Christmas Day 799. Charlemagne will become the model for all kings for the next 1,000 years. They will recast themselves in the form and light of Charlemagne from this point forward. Now, after taking control of the Frankish Empire in Western Europe, Charlemagne basically tries to consolidate his rule by strengthening the administrative state and obviously working through the established church as well. The problem is there's just not that many smart people running around, okay? This is why we call it the Dark Ages, right? So he has to go off and do what? He has to sort of build into his community the skill sets necessary to administer this far-flung empire of some sort. And so he starts a handful of things that become famous. It becomes known as the Carolingian Renaissance. So he builds at Aachen, which is on western Germany today, this complex, which includes this really, the first time in hundreds of years, this really monumental new build of a chapel called the Palatine Chapel. Now, is this chapel, what style is this chapel in by just looking at it? Romanesque, because why? Arches. The arches are the dead giveaway, right? It's heavy. Is there a lot of light in this place? No, I mean, you got a few arched windows at the top. That's about it, right? This is another way you know you're in a Romanesque church. It looks depressing, right? So, but Charlemagne's like, okay, so we're going to start doing some building campaigns, and literally he builds like 100 churches, during this period of time as he kind of goes back through and strengthens these monasteries and whatnot. But more than that, Charlemagne has a vision from Augustine of the city of God, right? And what he would describe as a sacred social order, okay? Taking and combining these two concepts, sacred and social, together, making Europe what he wants it to be. And to that point, he basically goes off, and that's what all the rest of this area over here, he's funding this, encouraging, participating in this renaissance of intellectualism, okay? It is a school. And he is going to attract everybody he can to this period of time. Now, one of the fun things about this is that, I'm going to go this way, boink, move this like that. Make sure. Oh, I'm way behind. That's okay. Here we go. So one of the things about this is that he's going off and he meets with this guy over here. This is Charlemagne meeting with a guy named I can never pronounce this, Alcuin, who is from Normandy, York. He's from the town of York up in that area. And so as Alcuin has gone down to Rome, he comes back up through this part, because again, obviously he wants to be connected to what's happening, and Charlemagne basically captures him and keeps him a part of that area. Why? What's going on in York and the British Isles at this time? Where did Boniface come from? He was English. So there's a lot of stuff going on over there. Basically, I'm going to bring this up. Look at that work that's been done on this. This is everybody ever heard of the Book of Kells? These highly manuscripted books from Ireland and stuff like this. If you've not, go take a look at them. They're fascinating. Really well done. This is not the Book of Kells. This is the Gospel of Lindisfarne. Well, the Book of Kells is Irish. This is English. So I'm trying to stay consistent here. But again, just look at the beautiful knotwork and stuff that's done on this. And the Gospel of Lindisfarne, every one of these Gospels have these massive, beautiful pages on them that sort of introduce, the Gospel, right? And all this stuff is really unique. This is why Alcuin basically stays around. Charlemagne sees this and goes, "This is what we need." And so Alcuin never makes it back to Northumbria. He stays in Aachen for the rest of his life, essentially. And they start working on doing what? Remaking these manuscripts. And so as the historians would go off and sit there and say, in about 150 years, they essentially recreate over 7,000 manuscripts, some of which are the only copies that we have. Okay. Now, and one of the things that they go off to do to kind of help through this is they invent a new type of script called Carolingian minuscule, right? A new form of writing that is not as big as like a giant P or all this other stuff that you see over here, right? What we know Carolingian minuscule as today is Times New Roman. So it's stayed with us. Which brings us to one more tidbit. Again, we talked about in Spain, you have this combination of Jews and Muslims and Christians hanging out there. There's a lot of stuff happening in the Muslim side of the world that we, again, don't tend to think about. And so there's a mathematician named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He's known in the West as Algorithmity, which sounds a lot like what? Algorithm. Okay, he's writing books in Baghdad along with other Muslim scholars on algorithms, cryptography, map making, and they invent algebra, which is a Muslim word, al-jabar, okay, which means restoration or completion. Now, they have created this Hindu-Arabic script, right, that comes down to us in medieval times looking like this. The combination of these two things to this is actually known, comes to us from a guy named Leonardo of Pisa. Does anybody know what else he's called? Huh? No. He's a different Leonardo. He's also known as Leonardo Bonacci. Again, I'm so tickled that What's-Her-Bucket's not here because she would know these things. Oh, there you are. You stood up. Fibonacci. What this guy is famous for is the Fibonacci sequence. What he's actually more famous for, in my mind, is he's the one in the 12th century that basically he is taught in Algiers. Leonardo of Pisa is actually taught in Algiers. Again, Algiers being on what? The north coast of Africa, where has access to these Muslim mathematicians. He sees the power of this type of script, this for business calculations, and he starts a campaign to do what? Push it into Europe at that time. So all these little things coming together. Well, we began with 3 different men. Saint Denis, again, his grave becomes a pilgrimage site. Clovis basically invests in it. So this is Clovis. Clovis invests in it. It becomes a religious center for the Benedictines. There's Benedict himself, right? The Merovingian kings give way to the Carolingian, but they retain and expand the importance of Saint Denis. Its influence as a Benedictine monastery there. And of course, we're not done with Saint Denis. We'll talk about him in just a second. But Clovis's conversion does what? It locks Europe and the Frankish leaders to the Holy Roman Catholic Church, however you want to go off and put it. But he locks them to the Roman version of Christianity, the Nicene church at that period of time, basically bringing the barbarian tribes, these proto-German people into and underneath that influence. And of course, it's Benedict who does what? Provides all the infrastructure, the intellectual infrastructure, as well as literally some of the physical infrastructure, like how to farm and be self-sufficient. Where it's a pray and work, we focus on the praying a lot. Benedict does what? He teaches people how to work in an efficient manner that they are self-sufficient and can feed people. And guess what? It's a huge benefit to all the towns and communities that you find Benedictine monasteries in. So all of this becomes the skeleton that Charlemagne and later rulers would go off and basically build the early Middle Ages around. I want to introduce this last thing as I transition out of here. This is Abbot Sugar. Sugar is outside of my period of time, but I want to pick up on this because this is a print. I don't know what you would call it. It's basically some sort of a painting where they're showing them rebuilding what? Saint Denis. Okay. Sugar, born in 1081 or so, basically is put in charge of rebuilding the Abbey Church at Saint Denis. And he is the first person who goes off and does what? Brings all the elements together of what we would call Gothic architecture. Now again, none of this is new, but the use of ribbed vaulting that you see up at the top, compound arches, peaked arches, compound columns, flying buttresses, timber roofs covered with lead plating, the entire enchilada, all of this, the very first place it's really put together in 1144 is at Saint Denis. Now, in attendance at the consecration of it, when it's all said and done, is the King of France, Louis VII, 5 archbishops, 13 bishops, and in 30 years, every single one of those archbishops and bishoprics will start their own building campaigns. In 50 years, Leon, which is the second one of this style built after Saint Denis, notice in 50 years, Amiens is twice the height of that period of time. In less than 50 years, that's how fast they're progressing. But the end of our story is this. The Holy Roman Empire, when it came together underneath the Carolingians and it starts to move forward from this, resulted in one last thing. The last big effect was the split between East and West, the Great Schism. In 1054, a papal bull from Rome was delivered to the Constantinople and taken into the Hagia Sophia and thrown onto the altar basically excommunicating the whole Byzantine church. And that was the end. East and West separated. The only way that that separation could occur is because why? The tie of the Frankish power to the Catholic Church, and they could go their own way. And for us, that brings us to the end of the early Middle Ages and the end of the class. Questions or comments?
So do you think this Rome never would have been strong enough to go its own way?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. That's why Gregory's the Great. Because again, he had a secular background before he had a popish background, if that makes sense, right? It's his ability to negotiate and to enter into call it an alliance, but it's not, with these immediate Lombards who are putting pressure on Rome that keeps Rome from being sacked again and again and again, and them losing their ability to keep the church there.
About that, Rome was a shambles when he came back. The people were starving. He was able to reacquire the land so that he could feed the people, and basically tried to turn it into a place that he grew up. I think his dad was a mayor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So all that was going on, and then on the split, one side was doing everything in Latin, and the other side was all in Greek, and they had a lot of problems communicating with each other, particularly about anything that had to do with the scriptures or anything like that. So you had a lot of tension there because of those things. So,
Yeah, exactly right. The councils, like when Satchel last week did the creedal church, it involved everybody. After Islam wipes out, 3 of the major bishoprics, right, and a bunch of the Christian areas, right, you lose all of that, those voices, and now the Byzantine church tends to look south and east more than west and north. Again, leaving Rome to its own devices. And so now, whenever you see the councils, they are either Byzantine in nature or Western in nature, not ecumenical in nature. So it's very, very different.
After all your study, do you think that Clovis, king of Cologne, passed the smell test?
Yes, he did.
right.
Unless you've been to Clovis, and then it has a different smell test, right?
Very much like that.
You can smell Clovis before you get there. Let's just depending on the wind. So yeah. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, let's pray. Father, this is thank you again for your history, but more importantly, thank you for how you have shepherded this to this point. Again, raising somebody up by doing something in their life so that they reinforce the truth, the Nicene truth that Satchel talked about last time, the Trinity. Again, something we confess but don't understand. And it's amazing, Lord. Again, you said you will build your church. We hope that as we go through this class, we continue to see that evidence. In your name, amen.
Amen.